Hey, good morning. Hope your Saturday is going great. Less than 24 hours ago, Joe Rogan dropped probably one of the biggest podcasts of all time, where he talked with former President Donald Trump, who is 2 weeks or so away from going into the 2024 election. And I thought it would be a great idea if we could hear the small clip of Joe and President Trump talking about healthcare and metabolic health. So let's get into it.
What are you, first of all, I love this idea of you teaming up with Robert Kennedy.
Right.
And I love this Make America Healthy Again
Yep.
idea, because there are chemicals and ingredients in our food that are illegal in other countries because they've been shown to be toxic. There's
Absolutely, right? So I've already kind of covered that when we talked about the Senate Healthcare Symposium that happened on September 23rd. I believe it was Food Babe that mentioned that we have 10,000 different kinds of ingredients that go in our food and something like 400 in Europe, right? Yet the same formula that these companies use could easily be done in our country, but they don't, for profit, for corporate greed.
pesticides and herbicides, and there's a lot of shit that's been sprayed on our food that really is unnecessary. And there's a lot of health consequences that people are suffering from a lot of these things.
I
And
brought this chart for you.
Beautiful.
Because I had a feeling you'd be asking me.
Thank
Look
you.
at this chart. These are healthier countries. Look where the United States is. I'm going to send this to RFK Jr.
Well, I was actually talking to RFK today, and he told me that more than 70% of young men are ineligible for the military.
We covered that too. Again, that was in Bobby Kennedy's opening statements to that Healthcare Senate Symposium. He says it all the time. One in three people, 1 in 3 eligible people, like as far as age and things like that, only 1 in 3 qualify on a metabolic level, on a health level, to defend our country. That's frightening.
Because of their health.
I could see it.
That's
a
crazy.
A lot of it's obesity.
So here's the life expectancy versus.
I could see it, right? So President Trump says, I could see it, which sounds like he didn't know, right? And then he says something which I really like. He's like, it's because of the obesity. Great.
versus health expenditure.
Same chart.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
USA.
Wow,
yeah.
that's pretty good.
Jamie's the best.
He's very good.
He's the best.
But no, but look at that. Look where
at
the USA is.
It's not good. And
they
that's our
spend all that
food.
money.
That's our diet. That's sedentary lifestyle. That's our diet. That's the chemicals we ingest. That's what that is.
But RFK is going to be very, I think he's a great guy.
I
think
love
he's
the
great.
fact that you guys teamed up.
Yeah.
I love the fact that they teamed up as well, right? To see that this problem is big enough that it goes across each side of the aisle in Congress, or each side of the aisle of the two-party system. You've got a Republican nominee for president bringing in a Democrat because he understands, both men understand how important this healthcare problem is to the country. I think it's great. That's what we're supposed to do. The country and the welfare of the country and the welfare of the citizens of the country should always come first before any political agenda. So it's nice to see that that's happening.
And are you guys,
combination.
completely committed to have him a part of your administration?
Oh, I am. But
He goes on to talk about how Bobby Kennedy Jr. and President Trump have different ideas when it comes to using gas and oil or being more green. So we're going to skip that because it's really not part of the healthcare discussion.
I said, focus on health. Focus. Yeah. You can do whatever you want.
But if he's bringing him in for health, yeah, focus on health. Help us turn the health part of it around, right? And then, you guys can discuss the other things, but let's get the health thing going.
With the liquid gold,
I understand. But listen, there's plenty of good work that could be done if you focus on health. Do you have anyone that is pressuring you to not work with him? Have there been people
not
that are
work with
reaching
who?
RFK Jr.?
Yes.
Yes, I would imagine. Because
I hope he says who. Please say who. Are people already pushing back on the thought of RFK Jr. being part of the new administration if Trump's elected?
financially, he could put a dent.
I would say that, and I think in many ways they've done a good job. In many ways they've done a bad job. But I would say that the Big Pharma.
There it is. Yeah, absolutely. So he's already admitting pharma's pushing back on, if Trump gets elected, that RFK is going to be in there doing anything about metabolic health, getting the country healthier. Of course, Big Pharma is pushing back.
Wasn't thrilled when they heard that, I have a relation. I've actually always gotten along very well with him. I've known him a long time. He's a different kind of a guy. He's very smart, great guy. And he's very sincere about this. I mean, he really is, he thinks we spend a fortune on pesticides and all this stuff, and then you end up with that chart is a terrible chart, the one previous. It's such a bad chart when you look at where we are compared to other countries that don't spend 10 cents.
Right.
So, and you save a lot of money. But yeah, I've had some people that aren't exactly thrilled. You can imagine, right?
Sure.
It's a good question, actually.
Well, certainly if
Now that's really good to hear, right? He's like, it doesn't affect me. Even though it doesn't affect him, right? Meaning he's still going to move forward with that agenda, regardless of if whether or not big industries are pushing back. That's great. But we've already seen in the past how people in charge, people like the president, can get completely undermined by all of the other bodies of office below them, whether it's a regulatory agency, whether it's members of Congress, members of the Senate, whether it's lobbyists coming in. We've already seen in a different video where Callie Means talked about how he talks with members of Congress and they all say the same thing. Hey, my specialty is this over here. Maybe it's infrastructure. Maybe it's, tax reform. Maybe it's corporate I don't know, whatever, but like they have their own specific things that they themselves are specialists in. And therefore they rely on the people coming to them, and then they provide studies, but the studies themselves are corrupt and slanted. You can make a study say anything. Just because somebody comes in with a study doesn't mean that that study is accurate or that the stats haven't been manipulated. So while I appreciate that, if Trump is elected, he's saying that's not going to stop me, that there's already a pushback. We've already seen in other videos with people like Callie Means, an insider who used to be on the side of the food companies, on the side of the drug companies, was in the political sphere, admitting how manipulated the information is that's provided to these lawmakers.
well, certainly if there
It doesn't
been
affect me.
some pharmaceutical drugs that have been prescribed that have negative consequences that these people have been profiting off of. And then you have a guy like RFK Jr. who spends an enormous amount of time highlighting those things. You could say how they've been
Right.
very reluctant to have you support him.
I would say that's an understatement. Yes.
Yeah. So what do you do to stop that
Well,
from
listen,
getting in the way?
Well, look, they've come up with some amazing things. I mean, I don't know how you feel. I know you're against the certain vaccines. But like the polio vaccine, people had polio. It was like a disaster. And they came up, Dr. Salk, and he came up with a vaccine, and there's no polio. Now, very interesting, there hasn't been polio.
Okay, let's go ahead and talk about that, because that's actually a really interesting take that he's saying, right? So he's talking to Joe. He's saying, okay, I know that there are certain vaccines that you're not really on board with, but we've seen how vaccines have been a good thing in the past. Just look at what it's done for polio. Polio is not a metabolic disease. Joe's talking specifically about metabolic diseases. We've already seen, again, in that Senate healthcare symposium, one of the things that Bobby Kennedy Jr., one of the stats that he brought up is that we have the worst mortality outcomes from that health crisis of any country in the world. 14% mortality, but only 4% of the population. That is a breakdown of metabolic health. That is a destruction of our natural immune system. That specifically points at a metabolic problem. Polio is not a metabolic problem, right? So where things like drug treatments and medical treatments and vaccinations, things like that are really good, are with things like virus or bacteria or something like polio or tuberculosis or smallpox, not metabolic disease. There is no drug or medical treatment that can reduce or reverse metabolic disease. The best it can do is manage the disease. And because there is such a big metabolic element and a metabolic component to that healthcare situation from 2020, what we see is that the body's response and the human response to vaccination isn't as great as we thought it could be. Does it absolutely help people and save lives? Yes, in very specific circumstances, especially if they are not metabolically healthy. But if we could get the body and the country more metabolically healthy, we might see a better outcome with vaccination. We might see less side effect with vaccination, we might see less of a need for the vaccination because the immune system and the metabolic response has improved. Does that make sense? So I appreciate what President Trump is saying here, but he's kind of comparing apples to oranges. There's a difference between a virus or a immune situation like polio and a metabolic condition.
There's two things that people point to when they point to the dangers of the pharmaceutical drug industry. One thing is when pharmaceutical drugs were allowed to advertise on television. We're only one of 2 countries in the world that allow pharmaceutical drugs to advertise on TV. The other one's New Zealand.
That's crazy. That should have never happened. That should stop, right? The people that make the best judgment for whether or not you should be taking a specific medication are people who have studied the body, studied medicine, studied pharmacology, putting it directly to the public and then mixing it with advertising and marketing schemes. That's the problem, is the regulation on what they're allowed to say.
Zealand, but they're more restrictive than we are. People are
but
worried.
those ads, when you hear like, take a certain drug,
And then you hear all
and
the
then you
consequences.
say it causes cancer and
Yeah.
baldness. We don't like baldness.
Suicidal
and this
ideation.
and that and
Yeah.
eyesight, and you can lose your vision.
Yeah.
And I actually asked one of these guys, I would never take. I mean, because there's things that are so bad. They go through a whole list. I guess they save some liability, but man, I said, does that affect the purchase? And they say it really does. When there's something you have and you read, and then they go through the list of
Side effects.
the potential side. It's not
Yeah.
even the potential side effects.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people are just. I asked that question. People hear that. When I hear it, I'm going to take a pass. It says may affect your vision, may cause blindness, may this.
Yes.
But
Well, I know you're aware of Callie Casey means, right?
yes,
Well, one of the things that they pointed out, and this is a very important thing for people to understand, is what a lot of these drugs do is they act to somehow or another mitigate the effects of poor metabolic health. But most of these problems that these people are suffering from wouldn't exist if we put an emphasis on metabolic health.
Oh my God. I love Joe Rogan right now. He's we got to hear that again. That was brilliant.
Is what a lot of these drugs do is they act to somehow or another mitigate the effects of poor metabolic health.
Mitigate the effects of poor metabolic health. That does not mean reduction. That does not mean reversal. Again, if you are on medications for blood pressure, cholesterol, anywhere on the diabetic spectrum, they aren't reducing or reversing anything. Mitigating the metabolic effects means managing it, which means you are going to be part of the big pharma wheel. You are never going to get well if you continue to just do the drug therapy.
But most of these problems that these people are suffering from wouldn't exist if we put an emphasis on metabolic health.
Absolutely true. If we would teach people what drives poor metabolic health, and then we give them the tools and the resources so that they can turn it around and correct it, a lot of this damage and money and cost and sickness and would go away. A lot of these problems, like 70% of the military or 70% of the people that could qualify for the military can't because of their health, would turn around, not be managed, be reduced, be reversed. We see it all the time with my private clients. If I've got somebody on the diabetic spectrum, within 2 weeks, their blood sugar is normal. Within 2 to 3 months, their A1C, which is the moving average of their blood sugar, is normal. They're off the diabetic medication. We are long past the point of saying that diabetes is a progressive chronic disease, meaning you can't turn it around. That's not true. The only time you can't turn it around is if you ignore it or you're just taking drugs to manage it.
If people got healthier, they started eating nutritious food and taking vitamins, a whole host of these problems that people are having would go away.
Yes.
And the problem with that from the pharmaceutical drug standpoint is they wouldn't be able to sell drugs to these people.
Yes,
And
they would not be able to sell the drugs to these people if you would take control of your own health and do really simple things to just turn it around.